Hello, how's it going? Hmm, Now, I have been doing tea time for, I don't know, this is like the 19th episode. I do it probably every other day. I think every day is a little too often, not enough to talk about. So I have I drink a lot of tea, probably a pot or two a day. It really depends on the day. But unfortunately, this is this mug here. I don't know if you can see it. You can barely see it here, at least on the screen. This is a mug that I got at the Tower of London. This is supposed to be one of the ravens there. That apparently, the if the ravens ever leave the Tower of London, then it's the downfall of the empire. So they sort of clip their wings so they can't leave. Um, they have little cages there for them to sleep and hang out. It's strange. It's kind of like a zoo, but I've never seen ravens at a zoo. So anyway, just this little video, I'm going to just talk about books. Books are one of the I'd say one of the most important things in my life. It's not like I live and die by them, but I just find myself doing things related to books more than anything else. Mostly reading them, but also thinking about them, researching them, trying to find new books that I would like, um, finding out what other people think of books, just books. And so, like I say, I'm a voracious reader. I probably read depending on where I am, what's going on in my life, like at the moment, if it's been a long day or a short day, or if I'm tired. Uh, but I probably read about 2 books a week. So yeah, that's a decent amount of books. And I don't read like little, see spot run kind of books. And unfortunately, when I was in England, the library system, I don't know what it's like in other counties, but in Buckinghamshire, which is where I lived, the library system left a lot to be desired. Um, their opening hours were terrible. During the lockdown, they're pretty much closed for good. I mean, I know that things locked down, but they did not open up until much later. It's something about librarians. I know most of them are very people. Um, and I think any excuse to close the door, they'll take it. So anyway, I know that the Philadelphia system, at least right now, the end of March, is still terrible. I think it has more to do with funding than anything else. Unfortunately, cities, I know that times are tight for cities, but the first place they go looking for extra money is in the libraries. They just basically just raid it. And they fund things that nobody cares about. But I really feel that libraries, this is coming from a very staunch libertarian, love libraries. They're the best thing that a city can possibly do. And basically, it's a bunch of books sitting on a shelf. And people, I don't think, really use it as much as they should. It's free as long as you live or work in the city. And that's true wherever you live. I think as long as you have some kind of like tax related relationship with the location, then you can use the library. Even if you just work in the place, you can just stop by at the end of your work day. But anyway, so what I was about to say about the library is that I've been going a lot, and lately I've been taking more books home. I've been going about 3 days a week up to the main library, the sort of central library, which is on the Franklin Parkway, which is up in Center City, which is about a 2 mile hike. So it gives me a chance to get exercise. The weather's been nicer lately, so it's not a chore to go up there. I usually avoid the rain because who wants to track up 2 miles down just to get a book? But since I've been going up there, I usually try to limit myself to 2 books at the max. which means that I am probably bringing home about 5 or 6 books a week, and I can't read them all. So it also means that I've been bringing home some bad books. And on the surface of the book, you don't really know whether it's going to be a good book or a bad book. All you can tell is either if you have some experience with the author about the subject, or you can kind of look and see. Sometimes if you know enough about books, you're like, oh, well, this is the, well, I'll give you an example. This is done by Cambridge Medieval Textbooks. So you think, oh, well, Cambridge, they're one of the most famous history-related universities in the world. Particularly ancient history, they are the best. But, so the thing is, I enjoy a lot of different topics. Sometimes I would say that I enjoy so many different topics that it's not like I'm bored by any particular topic, but sometimes the writing is so dry that I just can't read it without falling asleep. I know that sometimes that people joke about, just read something boring to fall asleep, but sometimes you just can't help it. And so my main question to myself, and if you actually have an experience with this or any thoughts on it, is like, when do you soldier on in a book where you're like, this is going to be a chore? Now, this book, the reason why I bring this book last night, I got this on Friday from the library. It's called The Medieval Spains, and it's done by Cambridge, so you think like they probably have the academic pedigree there. But I read it, and I read the first 2 chapters, which was about 50 pages. Just as a side note, I have no use for a book that has any chapters any longer than 20 pages. So these chapters are about 30 pages, so you're pressing your luck there. And so at this point, you think, like, when do I sort of pull the plug on this book? The book is incredibly dry. So this really takes place at the end of the Roman Empire in Spain. There was a Germanic invasion by the Visigoths in the 6th and 7th century, and they sort of populated a lot of the different kings, the thrones, it just, I know that some of this stuff is it's a different world, different mentality, so it's kind of hard to imagine like what the story is. But I mean, to be honest with you, I've read incredibly well-written books about the medieval age, the medieval era. So in different parts that I had no clue about. Say, for example, like out in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. They're really well written, so I know that I can really sink my teeth into any topic historically. It's really down to the writing. And so it used to be that, that I would just power through a book like this and just say, well, you know what? I mean, minus the bibliography and the index, you're looking at 109 pages or 209 pages. It's not that long. 50 pages was just an absolute chore. So I thought, I used to just power through and say, the hell with it. I'm just going to go through this and just be a savage, a wild man, and read a whole book, even though I didn't want to. But I'm at the point where I just feel like it's a waste of time. Like, unfortunately, I didn't see anything like this book in the library. So I'm done with that. But there was stuff on maybe like not the medieval era, but like the sort of a lot on the Spanish Inquisition, and then like sort of the whole unification of Spain as such, and then the Age of Exploration. But I wanted to kind of the reason why I bring this up is because my wife and I back in November went to Valencia, sort of on the about halfway down the Mediterranean coast. It's a really nice town, and I didn't really know much about Spanish history. I know kind of vaguely about stuff, but it was interesting that there was a lot of talk about how this was sort of the beginning of the when the city was liberated by the Spanish from the Arabs in the area. That was sort of like the beginning, and there's a guy, King Jaime the First, who was kind of like this guy who really got the ball going for Spain. And I thought, oh, eventually I should read about something about Spanish history, and it just really didn't get off the. I had so many other books going, and we had the move going, and then finally I was like, oh, you know what? I meant to read a book about this, and I just can't get through the damn thing. So, and I find that often when I can't get through a book like that, it really comes down. It's not the fact that I find subjects boring. I won't even pick up the book in the first place if I find it boring. Like I'm not going to pick up books about knitting. I just won't even go into that section if I find the subject boring. I do find a lot of things interesting, so I will go into any section that I find interesting, and so I'm open to anything that just sort of jumps off. Often I go to the library with nothing on my mind, just kind of waiting for a book to just jump out at me. And I think that a lot of it is down to the writing when I bail on a book like that, and it's not the topic, but the author's, I would say something like an enchanter, almost a singer, where the author can kind of turn what could be a dull subject into something really interesting. And it's all about the subject, the author's not only mastery of the subject, but the ability to turn something that could be dull into something pretty interesting. And the thing is that it's done through metaphors, it's done through language. Sometimes it's just a really well done narration. You can use humor, all kinds of tools that you can use, but you have to use them well. Otherwise, you're just writing words on the page and just sending it into your author. You're not building anything worth reading. Experiencing. You might have fun exploring this on your own, but you have to realize that you have an audience. Now, I often find I mostly read nonfiction just because I find fiction to be 9 times out of 10 incredibly boring, because what is a good fiction book basically is mimicking a true story. The best you can do is actually try to perfectly mimic reality. And maybe you kind of condense it, or even what's the term? Make what's the term? Like a reduction, like a sauce or something like that, to make it, to compact it. And the best nonfiction writers, I find, they let the facts write the story, at least the frame of the story, but they have to tell it, and they have to engage the audience. Even an audience who picked up the book at the library or the bookstore, they're already halfway there. You just got to bring it home. And the thing is that I find that a lot of nonfiction writers are like teachers. Now, often the teachers in high school and middle school particularly are... Unfortunately, a lot of the teachers then, I'm going back to my own experience, were usually the nerds of the school. And I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean that in a sort of almost technical term. These are the people, that they used to be, when they were in high school, the nerds. They were the ones who were just reading whatever was given to them. They didn't have to struggle with the subject, so they don't have to imagine what it's like to struggle with the subject, because they mastered it and they got it right away, and it was fun for them, and they don't associate this subject with pain and misery. So this is why I think a lot of people hate math. They hate languages, anything that's not exactly accessible. Like it takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of trial and error, complex or just arcane logic is quite difficult for students, especially when you have you're in a class, you might have your eye on the girl next to you rather than what's up on the blackboard. So the teacher has to find a way to get you engaged. Unfortunately, the teacher doesn't understand the things going on in the classroom besides the teaching. And so the teachers often don't connect with students, and because they were naturals at the subject, and the average student in the classroom is not going to be an English teacher or an algebra teacher. They're not going to be that way. The best you can hope for is that they actually just get the subject. Unfortunately, I think, at least in English, is that a lot of what is being taught in English is just not accessible to the average high school student. You think about this, so like Shakespeare, I don't think should be taught to high school students. I love Shakespeare. I think he's tremendous. I can't imagine one person who just gets humanity and gets life more than Shakespeare. But a lot of the lessons that are taught in Shakespeare, even just the most minor plot devices that could be lost on you, are not critical to the story, but they're kind of just there, and they just really flesh out the subject. It's lost on people. It's lost on regular adults, but I don't think that you could, like I've said in a previous video, King Lear, you have to have a parent who is kind of going crazy. There's a cat over here. And you have to have a parent who is getting old, is losing steps. Romeo and Juliet, you have to realize that often teenagers think with their hormones and their private parts, and even the best intentions of adults can really just screw up everything. And perhaps that children are not the most wise animals or wise people in the world, and that's often and that's just lost on teenagers. They just don't get it because this requires a lot of experience, and if you don't have that experience, you're just not going to get it. So anyway, so I often think that if you want to be a good nonfiction writer, or you want to be a good teacher, you have to find a way to make the subject matter transcend just the experience of a person standing in front of children. You have to you have to make them care. You have to make them engaged. You have to make them be in the moment and lose sight of the clock on the wall, or lose sight of just anything going on in life. You have to make them lose themselves in the lesson. That's incredibly hard, especially with teenagers, and they're getting increasingly so. But even then, even back in the 90s, teenagers were very just. It was really hard to keep their attention, and I imagine it's even more so because now they've got phones with they can chat to each other. Back then we just wrote little notes to each other on a piece of paper, but now you can send a text in the middle of class. You can send pictures, you can send gifs. All this stuff wasn't available, but we found ways to waste time anyway. But I would say that if you want to be a good teacher, you have to find a way to just engage the students, and it's hard. It is really hard, but it requires a lot of outside resources, outside of what's in the textbook or the teacher's edition of the textbook. You have to use humor. Humor is something that really engages students. You have to make the subject relevant, and you have to make it entertaining. And this requires a lot of creativity. And unfortunately, when you were somebody who took to the subject like a duck to water, you didn't need to outside help or outside resources to make you get the subject. You just got it, and that was it. And so these teachers approach the subject as if, well, why aren't you're just a bad student. You're just a bad version of me. Well, there are many ways of thinking, and they just don't get it. They don't get the fact that the students aren't going to be English teachers or math teachers or whatever. So if you're trying to, when a teacher's trying to get his point across, you also have to kind of, there's a sort of a check-in, you have to have a lot of reflection, find a way to see if the subject is actually, and the points and they get through to the subject. You can kind of see it in their eyes. They're like, oh, understanding. It's something that can't be faked. I mean, you can kind of nod your head and do this, but obviously, like, you can see in their eyes if they've got it or not. And you have to reach your audience. And the thing is, like, so this is true with universities, is that these teachers, like, they don't really care. They're just doing this because they love the subject in a very academic way. If they're English teachers, they just love reading books and writing about them and discussing them, which might not grab the average 14-year-old. But this is even more true with the university professors, is that they just, and I saw this a lot with economics. I got a master's degree in economics, and you could see that some of the teachers, they were phoning it in, even in the graduate level, where we're all interested in economics in that room, and you can just tell that some of these teachers are like, all right, I have to teach 2 classes this semester, 1 graduate, 1 undergraduate. I'm just going to phone it in. I'm just going to bring the same lesson I brought in last semester, or if the classes are on a yearly or bi-yearly cycle, they'll just print off what they had 2 years ago, and you can tell that this is just something they're sleepwalking through. And a lot of professors are like this, and they're very dull. They lose their subject, their teacher, their students. Sorry, you can tell it's a chore, and they're only teaching because it's a part of the deal. It's a part of, if you want to be a professor and you want to write papers, or you want to have academic discussions with your fellow professors, or you want to have seminars. That's one thing. You can do a lot of research, but at the end of the day, you are associated with the university not just for that academic, the sort of higher level academic stuff, but also for teaching. And then you just kind of go through the motions because of that. So it's unfortunate, but those are the only people you can get to teach it, because they know the subject so well that they just have to do it. They're the only ones who can do it. But the thing is that I find that it's very rare. The higher you go up, the rarer it is to get a university professor, or a teacher, university professor. It's exceedingly rare for them to be a good teacher, to get the subject, to get that a student might not know this, that they might have to learn a trick or two, especially if you're learning a language. They might have certain tips for you how to understand, like the difference between spoken French and written French is pretty big, and you kind of have to divide that up. But if you just get it, then you don't know these little tricks. You don't understand the pain that these people are going through. So, like I said, like, there's a little bit of a sort of segue into this, but I would say, I would go back to, if you're reading a book and it sucks, or you find it boring because of the writing, I would just bail on it. I would give it a little chance. Like I said, I think I did the ideal thing with this book. It's 200 and some pages long. I gave it 2 chapters to get interesting. It got even more boring as I went on. I just bailed on it. And hope for hope. I'm not bailing on the subject. I'm just bailing on this author. I'm sorry, Mr. Riley. What's his name? Bernard Riley. Sorry, Bernard. Probably won't be reading much on that you've written. So I'm just avoiding him in the future, but I will not avoid this subject. So anyway, that's about all for today, and I will see you in the next video. Hello.